For the longest time, I wanted to go to the US. You know it. I think, if I'm being honest, I wanted to only apply to schools in the US because that's where most of my friends were. That's where everyone after LAMP was going. That's where everyone after Talbot was going. So it was very clear to me on where I wanted to go. I think my brother's experience, as well as just some bit of personal experience, also shaped my decision, where I decided that I may be better served to stay in India, work here, make a career here, sort of work on my own self as well. There were personal reasons as well, but I think I decided on India before I decided on ISB, and after I decided on India, there was no other school that I was looking at other than ISB. I think one thing that differentiated me from everyone else is that I had done all my experiments and explored my interests before coming into ISB. They had seen that someone has worked in financial services, core sell-side research, then government, then consulting, then did a startup, then worked in e-commerce, like the whole host of things. So one, you could come across as not focused, but the other thing was that you also come across as diverse. So I tried to play the diversity angle, and I think that worked for me. So that's one.
Welcome to the Crack The MBA Show. My name is Nupur Gupta and I'm your host. Our guest today is Vishesh Jhol, who completed the postgraduate program in management from Indian School of Business or ISB in 2018. Vishesh holds a Bachelor of Business Studies degree from Delhi University and a CFA charter. Prior to pursuing his MBA, Vishesh worked directly with the Minister for Information and Broadcasting, Government of India. He also worked at Snapdeal in strategy and business development roles. At ISB, Vishesh represented ISB internationally at the Berkeley India Policy Challenge in California. He also worked as a consultant to craft the go-to-market strategy of insurance products for a payments bank. Since graduating, Vishesh has worked at Airtel Payments Bank, and he currently is head of startups at PayU. Vishesh, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Nupur. Thank you for having me.
Great. So to begin, Vishesh, perhaps you can share with our audience a fun fact about yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Vishesh Jhol, which literally means special mischief. So if this show is about if I can do it, everyone can, I think this is the way to do it. I made a career with the name Special Mischief in government and financial services. That's the fun fact about me.
Yeah, I think the irony won't be lost on our listeners. Vishesh, why don't we get right into admissions, and perhaps you can share with us, when did you decide to pursue your MBA? And as you're speaking about it, if possible, perhaps you could also share about the influences or motivations in your life which may have contributed to the same.
Sure. I decided to pursue my MBA very early. I think I was very clear in 2012 that I wanted to go for an MBA because when I entered the LAMP fellowship, most of my friends were planning for their policy school after LAMP. I worked in the government for a couple of years because Mr. Tiwari hired me at the ministry. So I worked there. And even after that, I did not go for a policy school. I was very clear I wanted to study business and wanted to work in business. So the LAMP fellowship is a program in which they hire you and train you to work with members of parliament. So it is called legislative assistant to a member of parliament. So the Center for Policy Research that runs it has an application program and a standard interview process and all of that. And once you get selected from across the country, you are trained on parliament procedure and you start supporting members of parliament. This is a program that started about 13 years back and ever since has 50 fellows every year that support MPs in Rajya Sabha, which is the upper house, and Lok Sabha, which is the lower house.
Okay, so
Yes.
basically what you're saying is that you knew as early as when you were doing the fellowship that you wanted to go for an MBA. And is there a reason why you felt so strongly about it?
I think for me, business school was always about delivery. What I experienced in government was that a lot of conversation around things that could have been done or could be done happen, but execution is really slow. So I was very clear that policy or government work would not excite me longer term. This was great in terms of experience, and I got to learn a lot, met a lot of interesting people, worked on very, very interesting projects, very enriching for a 23-year-old at that point in time. But I was very clear from that experience itself that I wanted to take my finance and administrative experience forward in business instead of in policy. That is why I was very, very clear. And after my stint stint in the government where we were sort of kicked out after UPA lost the elections. I started preparing for my GMAT. I'd gotten a job with a consulting firm in Bombay. So I went for that. At that point in time, very early on into my job, I got this offer to join a startup with someone I had known from the INB days, the Information Broadcasting Ministry days. It was with the former media advisor to the Prime Minister. And I jumped at that opportunity. Unfortunately, that startup didn't work out. But then I think that is where I really got the motivation of having the bent of mind to start something of my own and start something in business and have stakes that are actually something that you can deliver on. That's when I was very, very clear. And by that time, I was already preparing for my GMAT. I think I'd gotten in touch with you by then, I think in 2015 when I joined Snapdeal, because when that startup didn't work out, I started working at Snapdeal. And Snapdeal was really that move when I actually started working in business because e-commerce was very real. You had a P&L and you were heading a category and you had to deliver a P&L. I think that was my first brush with business really, and something where I was taking decisions that would lead to a certain top line or a bottom line, and there are multiple moving aspects to it. And I started really enjoying that process. And that's when I was even more clear that this is what I want to do. I believe if like Snapdeal did not go through the journey that it went through, I would have probably been there longer and worked through longer. But yeah, I was very, very clear from my end of my stint in government to getting to Snapdeal, getting that absolute clarity. And on that way, preparing with my GMAT and on my applications working with you.
And Vishesh, did you also have clarity around what you would want to do after the MBA? And how did you develop that clarity?
So this came in difficult. I think I had worked in a lot of areas, and even I was very, very unclear in terms of what I really was passionate about, because I was really passionate about development work. I was very, very passionate about something that has impact at scale, that gives me the experience of working with really smart people in the corporate world, get work and solve problems on the ground. I think I got that clarity when I started working with Precharge. So what happened there was it was a standard GTM strategy role to launch a few categories on the app. But during that process, demonetization happened in India. So 2016, November, demonetization happened. And within one night, Precharge's wallet balance, and people used to have wallets at that point in time. Paytm still does, but wallets is a lost concept now on a lot of people. But at that point in time, whoever had the most number of customers with the most amount in the wallet was the king in the game. The wallet balance increased by 12x in one night. And I remember taking that elevator ride with my CEO that morning, the next morning. And I used to lead the travel and fuel and gas categories at Precharge. And he said that, and this was a statement I'll never forget. He said, hire 1,000 people. We have to get all 50,000 petrol stations up and running with the digital payment acceptance. And I said, okay, hire 1,000 people. Like, what do we mean by hiring 1,000 people? He said, no, I don't mean it as a joke. You literally need to hire 1,000 people so that they can go onboard all of these stations, get their KYC done, put up QR codes, get all of that going, train them, get them on the road. Like all of this has to happen. You have to hire city managers and so on and so forth. So I think that if I were to say one moment when I got clarity in what I want to do, this was it. Fintech, which helped me get an exposure to the corporate world, brought in my experience in financial services and administration, and also had impact at scale. So I think these three aspects mixed, I got, if I were to say in that elevator ride of 10 seconds, that is probably the moment where I got that clarity that, hey, fintech may be the thing for me to do, and it combines everything for me, and I can take this forward.
Amazing. Another irony, right? Generally, it's the elevator pitch which the candidate's making to the CEO. Here, it's the CEO's pitch which like gets you the epiphany moment.
It was
Incredible.
quite a time. It was quite a time.
And Vishesh, once you decided that you'd go for an MBA, can you talk about the actions that you took thereafter from the perspective of admissions?
I think by that time, by 2015, I'd already started preparing for my GMAT. To be honest, I sucked at it for a while, but I think there is one thing with me that I will try to at least get to a point where I get to a score or something where I at least am able to get over the line. I think with GMAT, it was very strange for me because I always thought that I'm strong at logical reasoning and I would be able to do well at the test. And I would do really well in the mock environment, but not very well in the final environment. I think by that time, I had realized that GMAT may not be my strong suit. So I started working on a lot of other aspects that were from my time in government, where I had very real projects that made impact at scale. At Precharge, the fact that I had already done CFA would bring in some solace to people that, hey, he understands maybe a little bit of quant and he will not suck at school. that is what I started doing. So I started putting together other aspects of my application that would help me make my case stronger and project myself as someone who can handle the academic workload and comes with diverse experiences that can add value to the class.
And how long in advance of your applications did you start to work on the applications themselves?
I think I started writing my initial, not essays, but the storyline of what all I had done trying to join the dots in 2015. I think before I applied in 2016, I started writing early 2015. So there was 1 year of just writing, joining dots, not applications, not essays, but just penning down all of my experiences and trying to see what story do I need to communicate. And I think after the conversation with Govind in that free charge, the lift that I'm talking about, it gave me absolute clarity on how to take it forward. Like joining the dots was happening before that, but on what to say going forward happened at that moment. But for about a year, I wrote a lot about my experiences before I even started writing the essays.
That's really helpful. And I think it also speaks to the introspection process that you undertook, right? Sounds like a really robust process. And probably that's something that may be beneficial for applicants as well.
Absolutely. And I think this is one thing that I will tell everyone, that no matter what, when you start writing your applications, maybe just writing some stories out of job that you're currently doing, maybe just this elevator story, or you're having these stories, or you're part of these stories on a daily basis. If you get something like that, please write it down, because it'll always be fresh in your memory for a while. And then after that, you have to construct it going back to your experience.
No, that's a great tip. So basically, let's say if somebody's watching this episode and like they're thinking of an MBA at some point in the future, they should start now with any story, anything unusual, extraordinary that happens, jot it down.
Absolutely. Something as small as, and I remember jotting this down very vividly. So that's why I'll mention this. And this I did not use for my stories, but I still mention the experiences I wrote down. So one morning, Mr. Tiwari had called me at 5:30 a.m. and he would wake up at that time. So he would usually call at that time. But he said that Planning Commission is going to release its data around poverty. And again, the media is going to pick it up that they're saying that you could live in 40 rupees a day, and it's again going to blow up. What can we talk about? 5:30 to 7:30, we just started looking at data on how many people have come out of poverty during the 10 years of UPA. And that was our story. And that was brought up when the media briefing happened at 9:30 by the time we reached the ministry. So I think just stories like that, where you have actually changed the narrative of the last decade by saying that we're not saying you can live in 40 rupees, but we're saying this is the benchmark over which the schemes or below which the schemes kick in for you. But we have pulled out millions of people out of poverty. And that's really the story that you should talk about.
That's really helpful. The specific example, even more so. Great. And Vishesh, what led you to pick up ISB or choose ISB as the school you wanted to pursue your MBA at?
I'd actually chosen India by the time that I decided that I wanted to go for my MBA. For the longest time, I wanted to go to the US. You know it. I think, like, if I'm being honest, I wanted to only apply to schools in the US because that's where most of my friends were. That's where everyone after LAMP was going. That's where everyone after Dalberg was going. So it was very clear to me on where I wanted to go. I think my brother's experience, as well as just some bit of personal experience, also shaped my decision, where I decided that I may be better served to stay in India, work here, make a career here, sort of work on my own self as well. There were personal reasons as well, but I think I decided on India before I decided on ISB. And after I decided on India, there was no other school that I was looking at other than ISB. So that was the natural choice. And that's the only school I applied for.
No, that makes so much sense. And even if we look at the free charge incident, right? The how often does it happen that overnight somebody in the leadership team is going to tell you that, oh, hire 1,000 people just right away. So the kind of growth that we have in India, right? Just the amount of exposure that you get, it's unprecedented.
Absolutely. And professionally for me, I thought having policy experience in India and having business experience, I think in financial services, I'll be able to combine that really well. And it's actually worked out for me because in the business that I was leading before I started working on the startups vertical at PayU, I was leading a business that I had very heavy interface with the government, with the regulator, with NPCI. So it really helped me bring both aspects together. And I think my experience in policy in India really helped me then. Professionally, it was also a very good choice to stay here and make a career here.
Makes sense. Vishesh, you talked about some anecdote which you did not use in your essays, right? So maybe now could you maybe talk about, let's say, two or three stories that differentiated you from other applicants?
I think one thing that differentiated me from everyone else is that I had done all my experiments and my explored my interests before coming into ISB. They had seen that someone has worked in financial services, core sell side research, then government, then consulting, then did a startup, then worked in e-commerce, like the whole host of things. So one, you could come across as not focused, but the other thing was that you also come across as diverse. So I tried to play the diversity angle, and I think that worked for me. So that's one, because I could add value to the class in multiple ways. The second thing that really worked for me was that the academic rigor that I had shown before coming into ISB, with say a CFA charter or just in general pursuing and failing at few attempts, but still getting to at least a score which was a little bit below par, say on GMAT with the ISB standards, but at least they saw the effort and they saw the push. So I think that also really worked for me. In terms of the anecdotes that I used, I think one was in 2 years, I had seen Snapdeal go from 6,000 employees to 10,000 employees by that Diwali. And by the time I had joined ISB or while sitting for my interviews, Snapdeal was 2,000 people. The fact that I'm able to manage in ambiguity was a big aspect that I talked about during my interviews, not so much in my applications, because by the time my applications had gone in, Snapdeal was still about 6,000 people. So it wasn't that bad. So I think those aspects on diversity, showing academic rigor in various ways, as well as talking about how you can manage and survive and thrive rather in ambiguity, were a few things that I worked on, and that really worked for me during the interviews at ISB.
Okay, super helpful. And Vijay, just for our audience, you've talked about the GMAT a couple of times, right? Would you be able to share what kind of score you had?
Yes. So the final score that I submitted at
Yes,
ISB was
that score, yeah.
700.
700. And how many times did you take the GMAT?
I took the GMAT 4 times.
Four times.
Yes. So the first time I took it was, honestly, everyone said, just take the test. That is the only way that you get to know how you are or where you stand. I think after that, I prepared. And the second time I took the attempt, I thought I was really prepared and I was scoring well on the mock test and so on. But somehow my exam did not go well. And that I don't know what it was, but it sort of became a pattern for the next attempt as well, that I maybe got nervous, or I would at the end not be able to think and then mark 3-4 questions at the end just as a guess. I think in a time bound test, especially if you know that you've not done well before, I think that really haunted me for a while, and that did not work well for me. So if I were to advise anyone, I think just the test environment, one should probably go try and see the center or just see the environment once, and maybe just if it's possible, meet with the invigilators as well, just to gauge the environment and be well slept, well hydrated, well fed. I think I did not do any of those things really well. So those things, I would say, did not work for me. I still think I am fairly solid on the analytical skills, but it's sort of I did not do well on that exam for at least to my liking.
No, that's fair. And I think what it also goes to show is that, you obviously have very strong quant skills with your CFA charter and whatnot. And the test, it's intense, right? It's like 4 hours. It just really gets to you, the amount of endurance that's required. And another point being that, you finally got to a score that was a good score for ISB, and that led to your success. So even the perseverance really helped you get to your dream. So I think that's a really nice lesson as well for our listeners.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if nothing else, it's perseverance that has got me here. And I think I questioned this because the CF exam is actually 9 hours if you count from the time when you sit in the morning to when you leave. So you sit at 8, they distribute the papers at 8:30, 8:45, and then you start. The first exam is 9 to 12, and then there's a 2 hour break, and then it's 2 to 5. I think with the GMAT, it's really about keeping your nerves, because in CFA, you're not doing one question in a few seconds. There is a lot of time to think through questions, do it on a calculator, make your analysis, and then put your answer. I think what I did not do really well, which is something that they teach you in any GMAT training anyway, you should not leave a lot of questions or a lot less time towards the end, because that really marks you negatively if you get like 3 or 4 questions straight wrong. So that is what I think happened to me 2-3 times.
Understood. Yeah, that's a really helpful tip. And Vishesh, you shared something really nice, that people should jot down any nice events that happen to them at work, right? On a daily basis, maybe maintain a log or something of that sort. Do you have any other advice for applicants to identify those key anecdotes that can help set them apart? You talked about the anecdotes you shared.
I think one more thing I will say is research on the school itself, because I remember when I put in my application at ISB, I knew a lot of people who had gone to ISB. I knew there was this consultant program that you could pursue with a corporate that sends you. So the ISB doesn't have an internship, but it has a program that you work with a company for 6 months during school. So that is what I talked about. There is also, or there was at that point in time,
Which program is that? Can you mention it?
it's called Experiential Learning
So the
Program.
ELP, right? Okay.
Yes. So I talked about that, and I actually did that when I was at school. When I was applying, there used to also be this program that you work with a professor while you're at school on some research project or on some academic paper. I talked a lot about that with Krishnamurthy Subramaniam, who I was really going for, and he then taught us mergers and acquisitions, then went on to become the chief economic advisor and so on. So I really talked about that. So I think just research on the school, getting to know some people there and their programs that tell the school that you're interested in them and not just an MBA. I think that's another tip I would say that one can start working on: visiting schools, meeting professors, or meeting students.
Okay, got it. So did you visit ISB as well prior to applying or during the process?
I did not visit ISB, but I had so many friends from there, from my brother's batch or from my LAMP fellowship, some people who had gone, that I pretty much had a very clear insight into what ISB was. But yeah, I mean, I think visiting would have been a better idea.
Okay. And yeah, I think if people are in India, it's relatively straightforward to catch a
Yeah,
flight. Super, super.
absolutely.
Vishesh, what advice do you have for applicants to identify their career goals?
This I can talk about a lot because I'll tell you, I started this non-grade disclosure movement, let me say that, at ISB. Because what happened at ISB was that when I got in, a lot of people, and as they say, ISB is a consulting and a marketing school, mostly a consulting school. So everyone gets in, starts focusing on their grades, and then they apply to the MBBs, and everyone wants to just go there. And when I, because most of my flatmates were also very interested in getting to the MBBs, and I asked them what's really the motivation. Like, why do you, because I never understood that. What's the motivation? Everyone talked about an exit. Everyone said, hey, we'll work here a few years, it'll help me understand different industries, and then I'll get a great exit. And I used to find that very amusing, that if you're at school and you could do projects, consulting projects, and meet people from every sector and meet corporates from every sector, isn't this the best time to figure out what your exit should be? Isn't this the place that you came for an exit? I think from a career advice point of view, I will honestly say to everyone, figure out the sector that you want to go to. If it's consulting, it's great, but go to consulting for consulting. Don't go to consulting to probably figure out a sector which you will eventually be able to figure out and get to, because I think you can do that a lot better by focusing on that sector during school, because you can do everything at school. You have so much time, you have so many professors, so many different students, so many corporates, so many projects to do, that you can much better serve to figure out the sector at school. That's one advice that I'll give everyone. For me, it was actually easier because financial services, policy experience at Precharge, with that epiphany moment, it sort of led me to a certain direction. And I did an ELP with a payments bank at ISB as well, and then exited working for a payments bank. So for me, it was a fairly clear path. But to everyone who's going to business school, especially ISB, I would say that it'll consume you with grades if you just start focusing on that. And if you're going to go there for consulting, then please go there for consulting. And some credit to most of my friends who went into consulting, they're all still there. So 4 years, 4.5 years out, most of them have made engagement managers, make a lot of money. So it's worked well for them. But I would say that then go there to do that, not for a 2 year exit.
No, that's helpful advice. And you started to talk about some great non disclosure movement you started. So, can you also help us understand how that's related to this point?
Yes. So ISB has, during the placement process, so ISB, like in any Indian business school, has this unique concept of having placements. I think placements happen in November. So this is 6, 7 months into your school. So by the time you're 6 months into your 1 year program, you're already sitting for placements, and your CVs have actually gone 2 months prior to that. So 4 months into the program, you're pretty much applying for jobs, and your CVs go with a grade at the top. So whatever is your GPA is all it goes with your CV, and that's done by the school, and consulting firms, I'm guessing, are asking for it. Hiring managers in India are asking for it. So that, I believe, was a good way for people who did not have a lot of experience to differentiate themselves, that they have the academic rigor. But ISB, with average year experience of 5 years, I found that very strange, that we have to say to someone that we are in the first 4 months of our performance in academics, this is how you should differentiate us. I understand it becomes easy for the recruiter to sift through, but that was one thing. Second thing, it took away from my experience, at least, and from a lot of people's experience, that everyone just started focusing on grades. There were very little conversation around maybe ventures we could do together, your experience, learning from each other. And it made the environment also very, very intense. So that is what I started. And I spoke to our dean. In fact, I spoke to the head of our admissions, that, or even placements for that matter, that why do we have to disclose grades at school? Because we all come with 5 years of work experience. And that is what we should differentiate ourselves on. It created a bit of a stir, but it did not go really far. But yeah, that's what I think was probably my biggest contribution at ISB.
Okay, maybe in some time, in due course, right? That should happen as well. Because
Hopefully.
yeah, definitely a lot of global business schools do have a great non-disclosure policy, which I think what you said also helps to explain how that's helpful.
Yeah, yeah. It
Yeah.
just helps create a much more collegial environment than an
Yeah,
environment
yeah,
of
that
just
makes sense. That
yeah.
makes perfect sense. And so, Vishesh, through the conversation, what I'm gauging is, couple of handicaps or obstacles in your candidacy that you overcame were like the GMAT, the fact that you'd worked in a lot of different industries, which you, as you rightly pointed out, it could be taken as diversity, or somebody could also misconstrue it as confusion, right? So
Yeah.
apart from these, were there any other obstacles or handicaps that you also overcame through your application process?
I would say, other than that, I also was dealing with the fact that where do you go from here? Because I was already in a business role, and it is pretty much the exit that you expect, that you work for a Snapdeal, then you work for a Flipkart or an Amazon, and so on and so forth. Because Snapdeal was, at that time, at least at that level. So I think it was also a lot to do with talking about why you're coming to ISB and what value does it add now. Because I was slightly over the average work experience range. One was that. I think second was also something to do with being able to add to the diversity of the class, in some sense. Like, if you're saying that you're coming in as a fintech or an e-commerce candidate and not really a policy candidate, because there was one other LAM fellow who came in as a LAM fellow, like exit from the LAM fellowship was this. So that made a lot more sense to them in terms of diversity, whereas this was technically an exit from an e-commerce company. So I think those two things were also something that I had to deal with and explain, and at some point justify as well. But I think that was easier than the confusion versus diversity question.
Yeah, makes sense. And Vishesh, what advice do you have for candidates to impress the committee in the interviews?
In the interviews, I think, if I could just say it in one word, you have to be humble. You cannot come into interviews and say that I have already done pretty much what I have to do, or I've shaped things and I've changed things and I've started a vertical and I've made $1 million change, because they hear that story all day long and pretty much every half hour. For you to be able to say that I have done some things and I want to learn a few more things to get ahead in my career, is what should be the line of thought, or the line of your answers, rather than saying that I have already done it all, which a lot of, I think, candidates go and do. It also sort of irks some of the interview panelists, because some of my friends have now been on interview panels after they've graduated. I haven't taken any interview after I've graduated, but some of my friends have, and they see through it, and they see through the fact that if you've already done this in 3 to 5 years of your career, then you might as well just go and build on that, right? So I think being humble and being human is a lot better than saying that you're the most successful person that they've interviewed.
So maybe also just acknowledging the weaknesses, right? Is what I'm hearing.
Also, what you're coming to learn here, right? So you should sound coachable, at least, and you should want to learn while you're coming to business school, because you're coming and you're spending 1 year of your life and you're spending all this money. You want someone who is willing to learn and is also willing to share his own learnings or her own learnings so that others learn from them. So that whole aspect of being coachable and wanting to learn, expressing that in an interview is a lot more valuable.
And Vishesh, what do you think the admissions committee is looking for in its evaluation process?
One thing that they look for is someone who can handle the academic rigor. I understand that at ISB that it's very packed, unlike other business schools where there are term breaks and there are lean patches and so on. ISB is just on all the time. Like there is an exam every 3 weeks. There is a midterm and the final term, and then there are 3 day break, and then there is classes the next Monday. So I think academic rigor, that the fact that you can take it, that is one. Secondly, that you're adding value to the class, like I said, from a diversity point of view, as well as from the fact that you will be able to contribute to the class in some sense that other candidates that they have seen are not going to be able to. I'll give you an example. So some of my classmates, one person had come from a fashion background, worked at NIF, worked at really a few fashion D2C brands. Then there was someone who'd worked in the army. There was someone who'd worked in the Tatas at a steel plant, and so on and so forth. So I think just being able to say how you're unique is also going to help them see how you add value to the class. And the last thing, and I'll repeat this, and I can't say this enough, that you're coachable, that you want to learn, that you're coming in to learn. I think these three aspects, if people are able to display during the interview process, the hiring committee or the admissions committee should be fairly confident on getting them on board.
Right. So, Vishesh, now moving to admissions and the ISB experience itself, right? Can you share the academic highlights for you during your MBA? You talked about the ELP and you talked about doing a project with the professor, right? So, maybe if you want to expand on any of those experiences or if there's any other experiences you want to talk about, that'd be great.
Absolutely. So one thing I will say and brag about, I got an A in DMOP, decision model optimization, which is supposed to be one of the hardest subjects and courses at ISB. So there, my analytical skills.
Nicely done.
So yeah, so we have very like professors who teach that course are really the star professors at ISB. In fact, some of them or all of them actually from Wharton, Anjani Jain, Ziv Catalan. So these two professors at my time at least used to teach decision model optimization. Professor Anjani Jain is, I think, now the Deputy Dean of Yale. Professor Ziv is still at Wharton, I believe. Fantastic, fantastic professors. And that was my academic highlight. And I was like, yes, finally. That was one. I think academically, early on, I got a lot of training around statistics. So I thought I understood a lot of quant through my CFA charter, but a lot of stats was focused now around finding. There was like every conversation for the first 2 months happened around the bell curve, that hey, this is how you should look at everything, and these are the outliers, and whenever you're looking at making a decision, you should just focus on this and not the outliers, and people usually focus on that. So it really helped me academically, and the professors who taught these courses were star professors. Robert Stein, who taught us stats, Professor Waterman, who taught us, some bit of decision model optimization, some stats, Professor Ziv and Anjani, Professor Anjani, like I said, taught us some courses around quant. I think those were really the highlights that helped me add more value and add more analytical skills. The other thing is on marketing, ISB is a very strong school. So Professor Kirti Kalyanam, who works very closely with Google, helped us understand a lot of algorithms and how things work. They don't teach you really how to optimize for customer acquisition cost at ISB. They teach you how it works at the back end and how things work. So I think that was very interesting to know, being able to design decisions around that. These were really the highlights. So even though I went in thinking that I am good with analytics and quant, there was just so much new to learn in that area as well.
You talked about the academic pressure with the GPA and whatnot, right? How can students balance their time with academics, activities, recruiting, and socializing? How do students do that at ISB?
This is a pain area. I think at ISB, you used to say that if you sleep for 5 hours, you've really killed it. I think one thing that students should remember, that it is, even though it's a sprint, it's a long sprint. Even for 6 months, if they're planning for 6 months till placements, that you just go, it's still 6 months. Even 6 days going like this is heavy. And for me, it was I used to fall unwell because I would not get enough sleep. I would not eat right. I would drink a lot of coffee and tea. if I could give one advice to everyone on balance, that please do not sleep after a certain hour and wake up before a certain hour, and especially don't let these two cross, because most of my friends would not sleep at all for a few days. When you talk about socializing, so 12 o'clock were usually assignment submission times, or sometimes 2 a.m. as well. Some professors would extend that. On campus, there used to be birthdays every night. Like someone would have their birthday and everyone was always invited. So you'd go there and you're there till like 3 or 4. And then you'd go back and sleep, and 8 a.m. you have another class, or 9 a.m. you have another class. So, or mostly 8 a.m. And between that, you have to sleep, take a bath, hopefully get some breakfast. So I think in all of this, I would say people really need to realize even 6 months going like this is hard enough. Some people did it really well, but some people also did not, keep healthy. Like month on month, we would have people falling unwell, probably not being able to cope up with the lack of sleep sometimes, and then just would take one day off. So I had a friend who every few weeks would just say that I'm not doing anything today. I'm not going to any class and I'm just going to sleep in today. And this is what I'm going to do. So every few weeks he would just do that. My method was that after the classes, I would go back and sleep after lunch. Most of the people would do that. So you would sleep in the afternoon after classes. Whatever it is, you need to find that balance that you're sleeping at least 6 hours. You cannot do that to your body consistently. That's one. Eat right. ISB luckily has a fantastic cafeteria where they have cooked food. So I always ate there. So I think that was one saving grace. If you're drinking too much, please also have a lot of water. I think that's another tip that I will give everyone. Wouldn't talk about the rest of the things, but yeah. So these few things, if you balance well, you will do a good job. And it's very, very important also to do that, just to get everything out of the experience.
And Vishesh, what are the flagship events through the year that people look forward to?
Some of our flagship events, one is the orientation week itself. So when we come in, we have alums from the previous batch. So ISB, because it's a 1 year program, we don't have alum interaction otherwise. We will have some of the alumni who would stay for 15 days into the new batch, and they will work with them, do activities with them, answer their questions. So I think that's really, really helpful. The second thing that happens is Equinox. Equinox is really coming, some of the alumni coming back, and you from various batches, and you working with them. It's just a 3 day party, but mostly you get a lot of these questions answered, and you'll get a lot of this clarity on what's the path 5 years down the line, and so on and so forth. There's another very interesting event that happens at ISB, which is called Bandhan, which is this event on ISB bringing in kids from underprivileged backgrounds and MBA students, spending time with them, a day with them, helping them, with some coaching, doing some activities with them. It's just a fun-filled day. There is another event that happens at ISB where they bring in families from the city who want to just interact with kids. So these are usually either families of old ISB alumni or just corporates who are part of the ISB community, and they would call us for lunch sometimes and so on. So that's an interesting one. And finally, the annual conference that happens. So at our time, the former prime minister had come, a lot of senior ministers had come, a lot of senior corporate leaders had come. So I think these events every 1 or 2 months keep happening at ISB, that keep the excitement going.
Is there a name for the annual conference?
We have the annual conference. So there are two different conferences, one in Hyderabad, one in Mohali. I am forgetting the name on this one, but I'll get back to you on that.
Sure, sure. And you pursued your program at Hyderabad, right?
So at ISB, you're essentially at Hyderabad, like you get your degree from Hyderabad, but most of the classes, and you could take your sessions everywhere. Most of my time was spent at Mohali, in fact.
Okay, understood. And but you did spend some time at Hyderabad as well.
I did. I did.
Okay, understood, understood. And Vishesh, if you could just share a little bit about how the ELP works, right? And like you talked about doing a project in fintech. So is that something that you got to select, or were there certain options? And like, how does it all work?
Yes. So ELPs come in as listings with from corporates, and the Career Advancement Center will put it out that you have all of these projects that have come in, and then you apply for some of these projects. And it's a very standard application process. You put in your CVs and you put in your interest and why you're the right fit for it. I believe the Career Advancement Center sends it to the corporate, and then they interview us on selecting.
Yeah. How selective is it to get the project that you want?
I honestly do not know how many teams bid for that, but I believe it was fairly intense for some people because I remember some people not getting the project that they wanted to. And for us, it was a team of three people. And all three of us had a finance background and were very interested in fintech. In fact, we had started a fintech club at ISB. We were very, very clear on where we want to go. These two friends, in fact, ended up one works in investment banking at Barclays, the other worked at Mahindra's VC fund, and I came to PayU. I mean, started with Airtel, but came to PayU. All three of us were very, very clear we wanted to work in fintech, and we'd applied. And I think that sort of clarity came through during the interviews as well. And we worked with them for 6 months or so.
Understood. And then you're working with them like on a weekly basis, and then you make recommendations, like solving a problem, something like that.
Yes. So our job was to plan the GTM for their financial services. It was for an Indian payments bank, a large Indian conglomerate, and they wanted to launch their payment bank and launch financial services. So our job was to plan the go-to-market strategy for their financial services, starting with insurance. That is what we were working on. Engagement was pretty much on a weekly basis for the first few months where we were getting clarity, asking them questions, them asking us questions, us working on research. Then there is this 1 or 2 month lean period where we're working on placements and there are term breaks and so on and so forth. And then the final submission happens towards the end of the year, where we work with the professor first. We submit our recommendations to him, reason it out with him. He will share his feedback and we'll incorporate all of that. And then we present it to the corporate that we are working for. So that's how the whole process works.
And Vishesh, you also pursued this Berkeley India Policy Challenge, right? Can you tell us what that was about and how did you create that opportunity? Is that a standard opportunity every year? Just share more.
So it is not a standard opportunity, but anyone who comes to ISB will talk about spikes on their CV. So everyone starts looking at various competitions, and that's one thing that I would actually advise or suggest everyone to take part in. Competitions are a great way to make new friends, work on interesting challenges, travel, win some money, do all of that. So I think that's I participated in a lot of competitions. This one was sort of in the area of interest, in something that I was very, very anyway very keen on. So we worked on a proposal with Professor Prajapati Trivedi, who used to work for the Planning Commission, which is now Niti Aayog, and he used to work with Montesquieu Ahluwalia on performance management for government. So we created a proposal around how should we implement performance management for government and what mechanisms and what systems should we implement to have very, very quantitative or quantifiable performance management for government of India. And we started it with interviewing the Punjab government, and the fact that I had worked with Mr. Tiwari, and at that point in time there was a Congress government in Punjab really helped. So we were a bunch of friends who were very interested in policy. We got together, we submitted this proposal for Berkeley India Policy Challenge. We got selected. There were only two teams from India that got selected, and the other teams were from US based schools. And we flew down. It was a great event.
And like, do these universities, do they sponsor any part of the travel, or do you have to fund it yourselves?
Yes, so the travel for us was sponsored, the travel, the stay, all of that was sponsored, and the visa was sponsored by ISB. So I'm still actually using that 10-year multiple entry visa to go to this trip now. So it was all paid for. And I think the idea of this program wasn't just about going, the fact that we spent time there or just winning the competition. We spent 3 days talking to Professor Pranab Bardhan, Montek Singh Ahluwalia, Jay Panda, a whole host of superstar academic and political leaders. Gave us a lot of insight, a lot of clarity. Worked with a lot of students at Berkeley, understood how life is there. Attended a few classes. When I went there, I attended classes at Stanford, Berkeley. I went to the East Coast as well, so attended a few classes at MIT. Two of my friends were studying there, so it gave me a much wider experience than just the competition itself. And that's why, I mean, I think my best time at ISB was spent during competitions and just getting all of this new experience.
Very cool. And how do you find out about these competitions?
Usually, ISB's Student Engagement and Learning Center, called SEAL, they will put out a bunch of competitions that are available for business school. First is an HUL competition that happens every year. There are Yes Bank, Airtel. Every large firm in India would have a business school competition every year. And some of these international competitions are also put up by them. and then you apply for them, you put out your applications, and if you're interested, you make a team and you make your bid. If you get selected for further rounds, then you go ahead and you participate in that.
Yeah. Do these competitions also culminate into job opportunities or maybe contribute to job opportunities?
Some of them do. So Amazon and HUL, if I'm not mistaken, do give the candidates at least an interview shot. Again, I'm not very sure what happens now. It's been 5 years or so. But these competitions, I mean, some of them are really, really at a national scale. So the Amazon competition is telecast on CNBC. The Berkeley India Policy Challenge, for example, had a whole host of very senior politicians. It was also, live cast on a few channels. So if nothing else, gives you a lot of visibility. And for these corporations, if you've solved a real challenge for them and you've gone through the rigor of few months, these competitions, some of them actually last a few months in terms of various rounds that they have, give you a great opportunity at the first shot at a job with them for sure.
Okay, understood. And Vishesh, I believe you also pursued an international exchange, right? So can you share about that experience?
Yes. So again, I wanted to experience fintech across the world. And my theory was that I know about the US, I know about UK, Europe a little bit because there are friends there, you consume popular culture from there. China was just this land that I had no idea about. And there was so much talk about it, and there was so much conversation about fintech there, e-commerce there, and I was always very, very fascinated. At one point in time, interestingly, Alibaba was supposed to be one of the buyers who would buy Snapdeal. So I was very interested in understanding China and fintech and e-commerce there. So I applied to the school with the name Tsinghua, and the program that we had an exchange with is called the Tsinghua MIT MBA. So Tsinghua MIT MBA is a program that is already a combination of Tsinghua and MIT's MBA program. So students spend a semester here and their students spend a semester in China. So I applied to Tsinghua. I got in. It's a bidding process, so it's not like I applied for anything. I just like bid the maximum points I had because I was like I want to go on international exchange. I don't want to miss the opportunity. And I applied for it, got it, and I had to leave in February. I made one mistake. It was around my brother's wedding. So my brother was getting married early March. So I did not go for the orientation. And the Chinese New Year is around mid of Feb. And towards the end of Feb is when they open the university again, which is when in the last week or so in Feb, they have the orientation program. So I missed that. And then I landed straight in the first week of March, and I had to figure out my housing at the on campus. I had to figure out a lot of other things. I asked them the questions around the fact that I'm vegetarian. Will I be able to even survive there? What will I eat? The admissions committee or the admissions person we were talking to was very helpful, and she said that yeah, we have enough vegetarian food here. Housing is on campus. So there's nothing to worry about. And they also assigned me a buddy who was studying at Tsinghua. So from landing in Beijing and getting to the university was an amazing ride because this super sweet person who I think still is my favorite person in all of China came and picked me up, dropped me to campus, helped me get the initial like the housing done and all of that. But I realized how big a struggle language is once she left because even on campus, and it's an English speaking program, it's very difficult to talk to people in English in Beijing. Outside the campus, they just forget about it. I mean, I think it's just not a great idea. And then the first day I landed because I was just coming out of the wedding. Like the last night was the wedding, and the next morning I flew out. So I did not have my calling card. I did not have my internet. I had nothing, none of that figured out. So my WhatsApp wasn't working, my Gmail, my Google, my Facebook, nothing was working. So that was strange to like hit your phone and nothing pops up. Then I tried getting some food because I was on an overnight flight from Singapore. So I took a layover in Singapore, wanted to see some family there, and then came to Beijing on an overnight flight. I tried going to one of the canteens and I said, could you give me vegetarian food? And they did not understand what I'm saying. And then I called up my buddy and I said, could you help me? And she said, you got to say shu kai, which means only vegetables. So then I got my first meal on campus, which was sticky rice and shredded vegetables and some broth. I had one bite of it and I was like, oh no, I can't do this. I cannot have this. Then that night, or rather the next morning, we went and that entire day I did not eat. And the next morning, I was just so hungry that I called her up again and I said, could you come? Would you take me to a restaurant? There must be something nearby which is Indian or which is something to do with vegetarian food. And that afternoon, after she finished work, because she was a executive MBA student, so she finished work and she came early evening. And that's when we discovered this restaurant near Chingwa, at a mall in Wodaku, called Ganges. That was Indian food, like Indian food. And that's when I had my first meal after 40 hours or something. So that was my experience going into China. So I think if I have advice, please don't miss orientation. Please ensure that you carry, if you're vegetarian, carry enough food with you, at least to start with. Then it got really easy for me because I started eating there and made a lot of friends who were from Pakistan. So there are a lot of Pakistani students there at Tsinghua. I made friends with them. They started cooking food. I started eating with them pretty much every day. We spoke the same language. So they also came from the Punjab part of Pakistan. So we spoke the same language, and I started working on my Punjabi skills again. So we did that. We made friends with them. The experience of studying there, the experience of going to the Great Wall, just going around the city, experiencing fintech there, how everything works on a QR and WeChat and all of that was amazing. So I think for me, food and not doing the orientation were a big miss. Otherwise, the experience after that for me sort of was a smooth sailing.
Understood. And Vishesh, you've talked about a lot of activities and clubs you were involved with, right? Are there any others that you may want to talk about?
I was actively involved in public policy. Used to work a lot with the Public Policy Club in helping organize a bunch of seminars, conferences, work with this friend of mine who's also a LAMP fellow. So Mr. Tiwari, I also at my time came to campus for a conversation. So at that point in time, I organized like a separate chat with the students with him. So that was pretty cool. Even in the annual conference or Equinox, I used to take active part, but I wasn't really a president or an office bearer for any of the clubs at ISB.
Understood. And Vishesh, could you talk about how you conducted your full time job search process at ISB?
This one was again, so the openings that come up before your interview process, you can apply to a select number of jobs. I now forget how many can you apply for, but I was clear on where I want to go. So I applied for Airtel Payments Bank, among other places that I applied for. Airtel Payments Bank shortlisted my resume. They were looking for someone with some experience. And that was the first interview I took on day zero. It was 9 a.m. And that was my first interview overall. It ended with a couple of conversations in an hour. And then what happens very interestingly at ISB is that you can get maximum of six shortlists. You on that day or in the next 2 days can go appear for 6 interviews overall. You can't do more than that. Like if you've been selected by more than 6 firms, then please select which 6 you want to prioritize. That closed for me. And then after that, I was fairly relaxed that, hey, this is 10:30 a.m. on day zero and I'm placed and this is going really well. From an approach point of view, I was very clear that I wanted to go to fintech. So I applied to a very few places anyway. I did not apply to consulting. I did not apply to a lot of jobs in marketing or any other. I mostly applied to e-commerce and fintech. So that's from an approach point of view. And from a priority point of view, I prioritized Airtel Payments Bank because that was really the space I wanted to get into. PayU unfortunately did not hire, and I don't think still hires from business school straight, so wasn't the option. So that's how I approached it. Happened really fast, happened really early, and after that I was pretty relaxed. I did go for another interview after that. I think it was with Danaher, if I'm not mistaken, or one of the other firms. But after that, we were pretty much just helping other friends.
Yeah.
Microsoft did go for
Okay.
Microsoft.
Yeah. And
So
how do you prepare for these interviews? Like, how technical are they? What's the major format?
the Airtel interview was fairly technical around the sector. So you have to have some domain expertise. These are general management roles, so they're not really looking for you to be talking a lot about data analysis or marketing or any particular functional skill. These are general management roles, so they want you to have some bit of domain understanding and your view on a sector and where it should go. So my preparation was pretty much to brush up on things that I had done in the past and to develop a view on the sector that I'm going to and where will the sector go and what all do I think should happen in this sector. So that's how I mostly prepared, pretty much on the domain skills, nothing really on the functional skills, to be honest, and some bit of work around solving cases and working with a few friends around just solving regular consulting cases, regular strategy consulting case environments.
Vishesh, can you also speak a little bit about the diversity of the class?
This class was very diverse in terms of the sectors that people came from. So there were, I have friends now from the fashion industry, army, people who had worked in steel plants, who worked across manufacturing and retail and all of that. So I think diversity of sectors is really good at ISB. At my time, at least, there were some candidates who were international candidates also, but it's not very strong, as you would know. ISB is not very strong on the international diversity, but we had candidates from Africa, from Russia, from the US. There was this very interesting person from Canada who used to run a wellness company, and he would hold meditation sessions every evening. There was like a bit of diversity on campus, but much more on the sector side or the sectoral side, and much less on the international side.
And how do students engage outside the classroom? You talked about like the birthdays every evening, right? But even outside of that, how do students do that? And since you were at the Mohali campus, do students go outside the campus? How does it all work?
Especially Mohali, one thing that is uniquely positive about having a smaller campus is that everyone ate together. And there was great food all the time, and it was cooked food. So everyone ate together. I think that was the best way to meet outside class. I still remember that if someone's eating at a table, you would sit, you will talk to them, you will make a new friend every time you're sitting for lunch. So that was really positive, and I think that's something that I think really builds a bond, because when you're eating together and you're eating 3 meals a day, you'll end up meeting someone or the other new and having a very real conversation and sitting together for half an hour at least. So that's probably the best way to make new friends, make new connections, and so on. So I would encourage everyone, please eat cooked food and eat on in the cafeteria. The second way that everyone connected was we sat, or how I made most of my friends who are very close friends now. I never studied in my room. I always used to go to the library to study. So the library has a huge section where students come and sit and study all day, do their assignments and work with each other. That really worked very well for me. Most of my close friends used to sit in that corner of the library, or because they used to sit in that corner of the library, they're my close friends now. So that's another way that rather than sitting in your room and studying all day, maybe it's a good idea to step out and study in the library. And you may not get as much done, but you'll probably make many more friends. The third really is competitions. I feel competitions and study groups at ISB, like any other business school, you have study groups. So your best friends for the first few months are just those study group members, and some of them still are. But even case competitions, just going to Berkeley, we got really close, the four of us. There was another competition that I participated in with the Yes Bank, which the Yes Bank organized. Two of my closest friends till date are people who I participated in that competition with, because there's a whole cycle of preparing for that competition, going through multiple heartbreaks, recording videos for that, like doing a bunch of things together. So I think that really helps. And then, of course, if you're into drinking and dancing, then birthdays and parties every night, that's just the best way to do it.
Understood. Super helpful. And Vishesh, how do you now derive value from your engagement with the ISB community as an alum?
One is my set of friends. I think I cannot say enough about how I thought I will never make friends as close at this age. I always thought business school is about being professional and competition and all of that. But these are my closest friends now. These are friends that I've been to at weddings or have organized theirs, or like just taken trips, spent days at their house during lockdown. So these are some of my closest friends now. So I think that's the biggest value. If I were to say, let alone the corporate part of it or the networking part of it, just the biggest value that I derived out of ISB, or I still do. Professionally, I feel ISB in India has a very strong network. So whichever company that you want to, and not just for jobs, and my job is really about trying to understand business models of various companies, helping them scale up with payments and credit and so on, really helps, because I can reach out to pretty much any company in the country and I will find an ISB alum. So that's very, very helpful, very powerful for me. The other thing that is very, very helpful is ISB keeps organizing these citywide events. So I just attended one in Delhi. It was organized by a special interest group. entrepreneurship, and I attended that, met a lot of old friends, met some very senior alums. Someone asked me that they're looking for payments and they're looking for credit for their company, and it's a really large company that is looking for help. Just that a conversation helps you drive a lot of value in terms of business as well as just talking to a lot of alums. So ISB's network is very active, and ISB itself from an events point of view is very, very active. And digitally, your email group, if you follow the alum ID group, there'll be job posting and people asking you help or selling furniture or their cars and helping some people. I mean, during COVID, to be honest, there were so many fundraise activities that happened for a lot of alums or their families or their knowns. They asked for help and a lot of fundraise happened. So ISB as a community, I think it's very, very strong and very active here in India. And that's how all of us drive value from it.
Thanks, Vishesh. And Vishesh, as we come to the end of the segment, any final thoughts on how incoming students can be better prepared to make the most out of their time at ISB?
Going back to my non-grade disclosure movement, I think one thing you should go in with is that you want to make maximum friends. You will not know the concept once you're out of the exam. I mean, you will hopefully know the concept, but then you would probably not be as tuned in to the books and to the questions that you solve versus the friends and the connections that you made. Please walk in with this in mind that you're here to learn from each other, make new friends, be open to as many competitions as you can take part in, meet and learn from as many people as you can. Professors are amazing. There are so many opportunities like international exchange or international competition. Please take part on all of that. Do not just sit in your room and study, because that's probably something you can do at home and you can do anytime in your life. So at ISB, please be out there, participate, make as many friends as you can.
Amazing note to end on. And Vishesh, with that, thank you so much for taking the time. It's always such a pleasure to speak with you. I really, really appreciate it. And this will be super helpful for our listeners.
Absolutely, no. Thank you so much for asking me to do this, and always a pleasure speaking with you anytime.
Amazing. Thank you.